In this episode, we are moving into one of the moments that can shape everything that happens after a security problem is discovered, because organizations do not respond effectively just by noticing strange activity. They respond effectively when they decide whether the issue has become a real incident and when they know how to raise that issue to the right people quickly and clearly. Incident declaration and escalation procedures are the rules and habits that help a security team move from suspicion to organized response. For a beginner, this topic matters because not every alert deserves the same reaction, and not every suspicious event should trigger the same level of urgency. If an organization declares incidents too slowly, it loses valuable time. If it declares them too casually, people burn out, resources get wasted, and true emergencies may be harder to recognize. Good procedures help teams decide when a matter is serious enough to become an official incident, who needs to know, what level of response is needed, and how information should move upward and outward so the organization can act before confusion takes over. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. At the most basic level, incident declaration is the act of formally recognizing that a security event has crossed a threshold and should now be treated as an incident rather than just an observation, a routine alert, or a technical oddity. Escalation is the process of increasing attention, involving additional people, or moving the issue to a higher level of responsibility because the event is more serious, broader, or more uncertain than initial responders can manage alone. These two ideas are closely connected, but they are not exactly the same. A team may escalate an issue for deeper review before officially declaring an incident, especially when the facts are still developing. A declared incident may also be escalated more than once as new information changes the picture. For a new learner, the key idea is that declaration gives the event formal status, while escalation adjusts the level of response based on importance, impact, and urgency. Together, they create a decision path that helps the organization respond with discipline instead of relying on guesswork, personal opinion, or whoever happens to be the loudest in the room. One reason these procedures matter so much is that security events are often unclear at the beginning. A strange login, a suspicious file, an unavailable server, or a burst of network traffic may or may not turn into something serious. Early evidence is often incomplete, and that means teams must make decisions while still living with uncertainty. If they wait for complete certainty before declaring an incident, they may lose precious time that could have been used for containment, investigation, or communication. If they treat every unusual event as a major incident, then response teams can become overwhelmed and leaders may stop trusting the urgency of future declarations. Strong declaration procedures exist to manage this uncertainty. They help the organization define what kinds of signs justify closer attention, what conditions require formal recognition, and what thresholds separate routine operational noise from a coordinated security response. This is not about making perfect decisions every time. It is about building a repeatable way to make reasonable decisions quickly enough that the organization can protect itself while facts are still coming into focus. A useful way to understand declaration is to think about the difference between an event and an incident. An event is anything observable that happens in a system, network, or application. Many events are harmless, routine, or operational in nature. An incident is an event, or a series of related events, that threatens confidentiality, integrity, availability, safety, compliance, or business operations in a meaningful way. Beginners often assume the difference is obvious, but in practice the line can be blurry. A single failed login attempt is usually just an event. A pattern of impossible travel logins tied to a privileged account might push the matter toward incident status. A workstation reboot is usually routine. A cluster of reboots tied to suspicious encryption activity might be the beginning of a ransomware incident. Declaration procedures help make that boundary clearer by giving teams a framework for judging not only what happened, but what the event may mean for the organization. That prevents teams from staying stuck in endless analysis while the situation keeps getting worse in the background. Organizations usually base incident declaration on several kinds of factors rather than one single signal. Severity is one factor, because some issues are immediately serious by nature, such as confirmed malware on a critical system, unauthorized access to sensitive data, or widespread service disruption tied to malicious activity. Scope is another factor, because even a moderate problem can become an incident if it affects many systems, many users, or multiple business functions at once. Business impact also matters, because a problem touching a customer-facing platform or a high-value internal system may deserve incident status faster than a similar issue affecting a low-priority test environment. Confidence in the evidence plays a role as well. A team may hesitate to declare too early if the signs are weak or ambiguous, but strong indicators may justify rapid action. Good procedures bring these ideas together so that declaration is based on defined judgment rather than habit alone. That helps beginners understand that incident status is not just about how technically impressive the threat looks. It is about the combination of seriousness, exposure, consequence, and the need for organized response. Classification often supports declaration by helping teams place an incident into a meaningful category early in the process. Categories may include malware, insider misuse, phishing, data exposure, denial of service, unauthorized access, or service disruption, among others depending on the environment. Classification matters because it helps guide who should be involved and what early steps may be appropriate. A suspected insider issue may need different handling than a web application compromise. A malware outbreak across endpoints will likely require a different communication pattern than a small, but sensitive access control failure in a finance system. For a beginner, classification should not be seen as bureaucratic labeling for its own sake. It is a way of giving structure to the response so that people can move faster and think more clearly. Declaration procedures often work better when they are tied to simple categories and severity levels, because that gives analysts and leaders a shared language. When people can describe the type of incident and its likely seriousness in consistent terms, escalation decisions become easier, and the rest of the organization can understand what is unfolding without having to decode technical details from scratch. Escalation begins when the people first seeing the problem realize that more authority, more expertise, more coordination, or more visibility is needed. Sometimes this happens because the issue is clearly severe. Other times it happens because the responders do not yet know what the issue is, but the potential risk is high enough that it should not remain in a small operational corner. Escalation can move in several directions. It can be vertical, meaning the issue is brought to managers or senior leaders. It can be horizontal, meaning other technical teams, business units, or support functions are pulled in to help. It can also be procedural, where the event moves from routine monitoring into formal incident handling with documented tracking and coordination. This is important because escalation is not just about climbing an org chart. It is about increasing the organization's ability to understand and manage the situation. A mature escalation procedure makes clear when the first responder should continue handling the issue alone and when that person must bring in broader support before the problem grows beyond the team's ability to respond effectively. One of the most common reasons escalation procedures fail is that people hesitate. A junior analyst may worry about sounding alarmist. A system owner may hope the issue will resolve itself. A manager may fear triggering a disruptive process without enough proof. These concerns are understandable, but they can create dangerous delay if the organization has not made escalation expectations clear. Strong procedures reduce that hesitation by telling people what kinds of conditions require notification, review, or elevation even when the full story is not yet known. That matters because many incidents look small in the early minutes or hours. What later becomes a major compromise may begin with a few scattered indicators that do not seem dramatic by themselves. If the culture quietly punishes false alarms more than it values timely caution, staff may keep serious issues too low for too long. For beginners, this is a major lesson. Escalation procedures are not just technical guidance. They are also a way of shaping culture so that people understand when it is appropriate to raise a hand early and let the organization examine a possible incident before it becomes much harder to control. At the same time, Good escalation procedures must protect the organization from the opposite problem, which is over-escalation. If every suspicious email, every failed login cluster, or every unstable server is treated as a full-scale crisis, then response teams can become exhausted and the credibility of escalation starts to fade. Over time, people may begin to tune out urgent messages because too many minor issues were presented with the same tone and same level of disruption. That is why escalation should be tiered and purposeful. A low-level escalation might involve a senior analyst or a service owner for quick validation. A higher-level escalation might activate a broader incident team and notify leadership. An even higher level might involve business continuity, legal review, executive oversight, or external coordination. This layered approach helps organizations respond proportionally. It also teaches beginners an important truth about good security operations. The goal is not maximum drama. The goal is the right response at the right level. Escalation procedures work best when they help the organization increase attention in measured steps instead of jumping straight from silence to crisis mode with nothing in between. Clear roles and authority make declaration and escalation much more effective because people need to know who is allowed to make which decisions. In some environments, an analyst can recommend incident declaration, but a manager or incident coordinator must confirm it. In others, the first qualified responder has authority to declare based on defined thresholds. What matters most is that the process is understood before pressure arrives. If nobody knows who can officially declare an incident, time will be lost in debate or uncertainty. The same is true for escalation. Teams need to know who has authority to call in additional groups, who can notify leaders, who can request emergency changes, and who can approve disruptive containment actions if needed. For beginners, this highlights the link between incident response and governance. Strong response does not happen because smart people improvise well every time. It happens because responsibilities have been assigned clearly enough that people can move without waiting for unnecessary permission. A declared incident is easier to manage when ownership, authority, and communication paths are already established instead of being argued about after the issue is already spreading. Documentation is another central part of declaration and escalation procedures because the organization needs a record of what was observed, when decisions were made, why those decisions were made, and who was notified as the situation developed. This matters for practical reasons during the incident, because teams need continuity as shifts change, information grows, and different groups become involved. It also matters afterward, when leaders, auditors, or investigators may need to understand whether the organization responded reasonably and in line with policy. Good documentation does not have to be elegant or overly formal in the middle of a fast-moving event, but it should be accurate enough to support action and later review. For a new learner, it helps to see documentation as part of control, not as clerical work added after the real response. A properly documented declaration shows when the event moved into formal incident handling. A documented escalation trail shows whether warnings moved quickly enough to the right stakeholders. When that trail is missing, the organization may struggle to explain delays, confusion, or decision failures that shape the outcome of the incident. Communication is built directly into escalation because once an issue rises in seriousness, more people must understand not only that something is happening, but also what they are expected to do next. Escalation procedures should therefore identify who gets notified at each stage and what kind of message is appropriate. A technical team may need system details and immediate action requests. A manager may need status, ownership, and likely resource needs. Senior leaders may need a concise explanation of scope, operational impact, and possible next decisions. A common mistake is assuming escalation is complete once someone higher in the organization has been told. In reality, escalation is useful only if it creates better coordination, better decision-making, and better resource alignment. That means the message matters just as much as the act of sending it. Beginners should remember that escalation without clear communication can create noise rather than control. The real purpose is to make sure people at the next level understand the situation well enough to contribute meaningfully instead of simply becoming aware that trouble exists somewhere in the environment. A simple example can make all of this feel more concrete. Imagine a security analyst notices repeated authentication failures against a shared administrative account, followed by a successful login from an unusual location, and then a burst of privilege changes inside a customer-facing system. At first, each individual sign might look explainable, but together they suggest possible unauthorized access. A strong procedure would guide the analyst to escalate quickly for validation rather than waiting to gather every possible fact alone. Once the evidence reaches a defined threshold, the issue would be declared an incident, the technical response would widen, and the right owners and leaders would be notified according to the seriousness of the affected platform. If the organization had no clear declaration path, the analyst might hesitate, the issue might remain buried in monitoring noise, and malicious activity could continue longer than necessary. If the organization had no clear escalation path, different teams might discover pieces of the same problem without realizing they were dealing with one coordinated incident. Procedures help turn scattered concern into unified response. Another helpful example involves the danger of declaring too slowly versus escalating too broadly. Suppose an endpoint team sees a small number of machines behaving strangely after a software update. If the team immediately declares a major security incident without checking for operational causes, it may pull in large response groups unnecessarily and disrupt normal business functions. But if the same team ignores a growing pattern because it assumes the update is the only explanation, it may miss the early phase of a malware outbreak. Good declaration and escalation procedures help avoid both mistakes by building decision points into the process. Early escalation may bring in another set of eyes or additional monitoring without instantly triggering full crisis handling. Formal declaration may follow once there is enough evidence of malicious activity, business impact, or broader spread. This teaches beginners that mature response is not built on dramatic instincts alone. It is built on thresholds, categories, authority, and communication paths that allow the organization to adjust its posture as the facts develop instead of staying frozen at one extreme or the other. By the end of this discussion, the main lesson is that incident declaration and escalation procedures are what help an organization move from uncertainty into coordinated action. Declaration gives formal recognition that an event has become serious enough to require structured incident handling, while escalation raises the level of attention, expertise, authority, and communication needed to manage the situation well. Together, they reduce hesitation, prevent isolated teams from carrying too much risk alone, and help the organization respond in proportion to the true seriousness of the problem. They also make it easier to classify incidents, assign responsibility, document decisions, and keep stakeholders informed as the picture changes. For a new CySA Plus learner, the mindset to keep is that the quality of a response often depends on these early decisions more than people realize. A threat may enter quietly, but it becomes manageable when the organization knows when to call it an incident, when to raise it higher, and how to do both in a way that brings order instead of confusion.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.